Welcome back. This channel exists because of your support. Subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get into the story. There I was, sitting in the private dining room of the Capitol Grill in Boston, watching my wife transform into someone I barely recognized. I'd been here before. Not this restaurant, but this dynamic. Being the outsider at my own table, Diane had insisted on driving tonight. Strategic, not thoughtful. She wanted me trapped, contained, and most importantly, she wanted me to pay. Kristen, Beverly, and Jolene were already seated when we arrived at 7:30, clearly mid-conversation that stopped when I appeared. The dropped voices, the exchanged glances. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Diane slid into the booth next to her friends, leaving me across from them like I was being interviewed for a position I'd never get. Nothing tonight was an accident. "Glenn, so glad you could make it," Kristen said, her smile sharp as glass. Divorced twice, convinced that made her an expert on everyone else's relationships. "I honestly wasn't sure you'd show up." "Well, someone has to make sure the bill gets paid, right?" Diane laughed too loud, too performative. The laugh she reserved for when she wanted her friends to know she was in on the joke. The joke was me. A server appeared. Diane ordered wine without asking what I wanted. Small thing, maybe. But 18 years of small things had taught me to recognize patterns. "You're so accommodating," Beverly said, with that fake sweetness women perfect when they want a wound without appearing hostile. Letting Diane have her girls' nights. "That's so rare these days." "I prefer to think of it as being a partner," I said. "Supporting each other's interests." "Of course," Kristen added. "Though I have to say, you're lucky. Most men would throw a fit about their wives going out this much." The first real jab, dressed as a compliment to Diane while taking a shot at me. I'd heard these friends complain about their relationships enough to recognize the playbook. Over the years, Diane had vented to me about Kristen's failed marriages, Beverly's absent husband, Jolene's separation. I listened, absorbed, observed. Now I realized I'd been gathering intelligence I never wanted to use. "Well," I said, cutting into the bread that had arrived, "not everyone needs to control their partner's every move to feel secure." Kristen's face flashed with irritation, just for a second, before the smile returned. But I'd landed the hit. She knew it, and more importantly, Diane knew it. Under the table, Diane's foot connected with my shin. A warning. Not a gentle, "let's keep the peace" tap, but a sharp kick that said I was messing up her script. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone more concerned about what her friends thought than how her husband was being treated. That told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in this marriage. The appetizers arrived. Diane had ordered oysters and lobster bisque without consulting the menu or checking the prices. Why would she? She wasn't paying. That's what I was here for. 18 years of marriage, and somewhere along the way, I'd become the help. "So, Glenn," Kristen continued, clearly deciding to take another swing now that she'd recovered from my first counter. "Diane mentioned you're still at the same company. Same position too, right? No interest in moving up?" I set down my water glass carefully. "I'm satisfied with meaningful work. Not everyone needs a fancy title to feel accomplished." Sure. Beverly jumped in, following Kristen's lead like she always did. "But don't you want more? My husband just made VP at his firm. The opportunities at that level are incredible." I happen to know that Beverly's husband was a regional sales manager, not a VP, and that he was currently having what Diane had described as an emotional affair with his new assistant. But I kept that to myself. For now. Not everyone needs validation from business cards, I said instead, keeping my tone light, but letting the barb show through. Jolene had been quiet up until this point, just watching, taking mental notes like she was preparing for a trial. She was a paralegal, divorced recently, living with her sister because her husband had left her for someone younger. Now she leaned forward with that look I'd seen her use in court documents, surgical and precise. "Must be nice," she said softly, "having a wife who doesn't pressure you to achieve more. Some women would push their husbands harder." "Must be nice having a husband who shows up," I replied, meeting her eyes directly. The table went completely silent for about 3 seconds. Jolene's face went pale, Beverly's mouth fell open slightly, and Kristen looked like I'd just slapped her across the face. Even Diane froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Then Diane kicked me again, harder this time, and shot me a look that was supposed to warn me to back down. But all I saw in that look was someone who cared more about her friend's comfort than her husband's dignity. Message received, loud and clear. Wow, Kristen said, trying to recover her composure. Someone's sensitive tonight. Not sensitive, I corrected. Just paying attention. You'd be surprised what you notice when you actually listen. The main courses arrived around 8:35, and with them came the second round of drinks. The private dining room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Through the large windows facing the street, I could see other diners in the main restaurant, normal couples having normal conversations, and I felt a strange pang of envy for their ordinary problems. Beverly picked up where Kristen had left off, because that's how they operated. Pack animals, circling their prey. You know what I admire about you two? Diane's so independent, and you're so flexible with her schedule. That takes a special kind of man. Flexible is one word for it, Kristen added, and all three women laughed. Interesting, I said, sawing into my steak with more force than necessary. How respectful becomes weak in translation. It's almost like you've put some thought into that. Beverly's smile tightened. We didn't say weak. You didn't have to. That's what made it clever. Diane finally spoke up. Joining in like this was just friendly banter among friends. He really is good about giving me space. I can't complain about that. Can't complain. As if my accommodation of her social life was the bare minimum I could offer, not a choice I'd made out of love and trust. Years of training myself to ignore red flags. Years of telling myself that a good marriage meant supporting your partner's independence. And now here we were, with her literally complaining about my lack of complaints. You have to admit, Kristen said, emboldened by Diane's participation. Traditional gender roles have shifted. Some men handle that better than others. And some women, I replied, confuse partnership with having an employee who funds their lifestyle. The glances the three friends exchanged told me I was right. This wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated, rehearsed, planned. Diane had brought me here tonight for a specific reason, and it wasn't to enjoy a nice dinner with friends. By 9:10, the second round of drinks had loosened whatever restraint had remained. Beverly launched into a story about how her husband still pursued her romantically after 15 years of marriage, taking her on surprise dates, leaving her love notes, all the things that supposedly kept a marriage fresh. I knew for a fact that her husband had been in Chicago 3 times in the past month, each time with his assistant, because Diane had mentioned it in passing. But Beverly was spinning a fantasy, and everyone at the table was supposed to play along. That's so important, Kristen added, nodding sagely like she had any authority to speak on successful marriages. Men can't get complacent. The spark has to stay alive. Diane joined in immediately. Right? The spark has to stay alive. You can't just coast on history. All three of them looked at me then, like I was Exhibit A in the case of complacent husbands versus exciting lives. Spark requires 2 people lighting it, I said, taking a deliberate sip of my water. Pretty hard to do solo. Diane's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Jolene, who'd been building up to something for the past hour, finally struck. Maybe if you made more effort. Took her places, surprised her, showed some spontaneity. Like this dinner? I asked, gesturing around the table. Oh wait, I'm just here to fund it. My mistake. The tension was visible now, a physical presence in the room. The server who came to check on us took one look at our faces and retreated quickly, probably recognizing the signs of a table about to implode. See, Kristen said, pouncing on what she saw as weakness. This defensiveness is exactly what we're talking about. The inability to take constructive criticism. I repeated slowly, looking at each of them in turn. So this was planned. This intervention about everything wrong with me. Don't be ridiculous, Diane said, but her voice lacked conviction. We're just talking. Can't we have a conversation? Is that what you call systematically attacking your husband's character in public? Talking? Beverly jumped in, trying to shift the focus. No one's attacking you. We're just concerned about Diane. She deserves someone who matches her energy. Someone exciting, Kristen added. Ambitious. Someone with presence. I set down my fork and looked directly at Kristen. Someone who isn't me. Just say it directly instead of dancing around it. Well, Jolene said quietly. You have to admit you've gotten comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. Diane needs someone who challenges her, not just agrees with everything. I don't agree with everything, I said, feeling something cold settle in my chest. A clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I'm just selective about which battles are worth fighting. Though I'm starting to think I've been selecting wrong all these years. The dessert menus arrived at 9:45. Diane ordered chocolate soufflés for everyone without asking, naturally choosing one of the most expensive items. Why not? It wasn't her money. That's when Kristen decided to drop the pretense entirely. Can we be honest here? Diane deserves someone who matches her energy. Someone who pushes her to be more, not just someone who's comfortable. Beverly nodded enthusiastically. Someone who challenges her, makes her better. Someone exciting, Jolene added, her voice soft but cutting. Not just a roommate who pays the bills. And through it all, Diane sat there smiling. Not uncomfortable smiling, not embarrassed for her friend's behavior. No, this was genuine amusement. She was enjoying this. The woman I'd married, the one who used to defend me against anyone who even looked at me sideways, was now actively participating in my humiliation. I felt something click into place. A clarity so sharp it was almost physical. This wasn't about tonight. This was about what our entire marriage had become. I was the ATM, the reliable provider, the guy who showed up when needed and disappeared when inconvenient. You know what's fascinating? I said, my voice calm in a way that made everyone pause. You three have spent this entire evening explaining everything wrong with me. My career, my personality, my value as a partner. And Diane, you've been nodding along, adding your own observations, treating this like it's helpful. Glenn, Diane started, a warning in her voice. But let me return the favor. I continued, looking at Kristen. You've been married twice, and both times your husbands left you. Not divorce, not mutual separation. They left. Maybe the common denominator isn't them. Kristen's face went white. I turned to Beverly. And your husband's business trips? Interesting that his assistant Jennifer has the exact same travel schedule. But I'm sure those late-night hotel stays in Chicago are completely professional. Beverly's hand shook, spilling wine on the white tablecloth. Finally, I looked at Jolene. At least my wife is still sitting at the same table as me. That's more than you can say about your marriage, isn't it? Stop, Diane said, standing up suddenly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing attention from tables outside our private room. Just stop. Happy to, I said calmly. You want me to leave? If you can't handle some honest feedback from my friends, she started. From people who care about her, Kristen interjected. Diane looked around the table at her friends, then back at me, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. And then she said it. The 6 words that would end 18 years of marriage in a single breath. Then just pay the bill and leave if you don't like it. The entire restaurant seemed to go quiet. Even the ambient noise of silverware and conversation felt like it had stopped. Through the windows, I could see people at other tables had noticed the commotion, were trying not to stare but couldn't help themselves. At 10:15, I stood up slowly. Every eye in the visible restaurant was on us now, but I didn't care about appearances anymore. My wife had made it crystal clear what my role was. Not her husband, not her partner, but her wallet. Someone who should either shut up or get out. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my wallet, and for just a second, I saw Diane's face brighten. She thought I was going to pay, going to comply, going to play my assigned role like I'd done for 18 years. Instead, I placed the wallet back in my jacket and looked directly at her. You're absolutely right. I should leave. Good, she said, relief washing over her face. So we can just use the ring to pay. I interrupted, my voice carrying across the dining room. The marriage is over. Complete silence. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in a space stops breathing at the same moment. Diane's mouth fell open. Her friends stared like I'd just announced I was from another planet. And I felt lighter than I had in years. What? Diane whispered. You heard me. You just told me my only purpose here is to pay the bills and shut up. So find someone else. I'm done. Wait, Kristen started. He's bluffing. I turned to her. Keep telling yourself that. Beverly found her voice. Diane, tell him he's overreacting. She just did, I said. Multiple times tonight. While you three explained everything that's wrong with me. I took my wallet from my jacket and headed toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Diane's voice, rising with panic. Glenn? Glenn, you can't be serious. I stopped at the entrance to the private dining room and looked back one last time. Diane was standing now, her face pale, her friends looking between her and me like they couldn't quite process what was happening. 18 years, I said. And you just reduced me to a wallet with legs. In public. I'm dead serious. Please, Diane said, taking a step toward me. Everyone's watching. Then you should have thought about that before tonight's performance. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Diane's nervous laugh, then her voice calling my name again, higher pitched this time, desperate. But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I was going. Away. The parking garage was quiet, my footsteps echoing off concrete as I walked to my car. My hands shook slightly as I unlocked the door, but it wasn't doubt or regret. It was adrenaline, pure and simple. The adrenaline of finally enforcing a boundary. I sat in my Audi for a moment, just breathing. The cool leather, the familiar smell, the silence. No voices telling me what I was doing wrong, no laughter at my expense, no performance for an audience that had already decided I was the villain in their story. My phone was where I'd left it, in the center console. I'd turned it to silent before dinner, thinking it was polite to give Diane and her friends my full attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. I started the car and pulled out of the garage, pointing toward I-95 South. The drive home to Newton would give me time to think, to process, to make the calls I needed to make. I rolled down the windows, letting the cold October air hit my face like a wake-up call. For the first time in months, maybe years, my head was completely clear. No second-guessing, no wondering if I'd overreacted. Just pure, crystal certainty that I'd made the right choice. That peace lasted exactly 23 minutes. Around 10:25, my phone started buzzing. At first, just one notification. Then two. Then a steady stream that I could hear, even over the wind and traffic noise. By the time I was halfway home, it was buzzing so frequently it sounded like an angry hornet trapped in my cup holder. I pulled off at a rest stop on I-95 and checked my phone. 71 messages. 71. All from Diane. And they told the story of someone slowly realizing their bluff had been called. The first few were angry. This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself. Come back here right now. Classic power plays from someone who expected me to fold under pressure, who'd been trained by 18 years of me folding under pressure. Then came the bargaining phase. Okay, fine, maybe we went too far. We can talk about this like adults. Just come back and we'll work it out. But as I scrolled through the messages, I could watch her confidence crumble in real time. Please don't do this became, I'm sorry, okay? Which became, they're saying you're serious. And finally, the message that almost made me laugh out loud. Oh my God, you actually left me here. The reality of sitting there with a $300 dinner bill and no way to pay it had apparently cut through her delusions pretty quickly. Message 45 confirmed it. The waiter brought the check. This isn't funny anymore. So she'd finally figured out that her human ATM had actually left the building. Message 52. I had to call my sister to bring her credit card. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I did laugh at that one. She was worried about being humiliated now, after spending an entire evening orchestrating my public humiliation for her friend's entertainment. By message 60, the anger was back, but this time it had an edge of desperation. You can't just abandon me like this. What am I supposed to tell people? This is not how marriages work. Apparently, marriages worked by having one person pay for everything while tolerating any level of disrespect. But they didn't work when that same person decided they'd had enough. I sat in my car at the rest stop and called my lawyer's emergency line. Michael Foster had been handling my firm's contracts for years, but I also knew he had a family law practice. His voicemail picked up, and I left a message that made it clear this wasn't something that could wait until Monday. Michael, it's Glenn Whitmore. I need an emergency consultation first thing tomorrow morning. My marriage is over as of tonight. Public witnesses, text message documentation, the works. Call me back as soon as you get this. Next, I called my accountant and left a similar message. When you've built a life with someone for 18 years, you don't just walk away. You strategically withdraw while protecting everything you've worked for. My phone rang almost immediately. Unknown number. I answered it cautiously. Oh, so you do answer your phone. Kristen. Her voice was absolutely furious, which meant Diane had enlisted her help in getting me to come back. What do you want, Kristen? What the hell is wrong with you? Your wife is sitting here crying her eyes out, and you just disappeared like some kind of coward. Real mature, running away from a conversation. I pulled over more completely in the parking spot because this conversation was going to require my full attention. Running away from a conversation? Is that what you call what happened back there? Look, maybe we got a little carried away with the teasing, but that's no reason to throw a tantrum and abandon your wife. Teasing. I repeated the word slowly, tasting how wrong it felt. You spent an hour systematically attacking my character, my masculinity, my worth as a human being, with my wife's full participation and encouragement. Then she told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't handle it. But I'm the one throwing a tantrum. She didn't mean it like that, and you know it. No, I don't know it. What I know is that she meant it exactly like that. And now that there are consequences, suddenly everyone wants to pretend it was all just harmless fun. Kristen's voice got sharper. You're being ridiculous. She's your wife. You don't just walk away from your wife over some jokes. You're right, I said, and I could hear her start to relax, thinking she'd gotten through to me. I don't walk away over jokes. I walk away when my wife makes it clear that I'm nothing more than a wallet with legs whose only purpose is to pay for her entertainment while she and her friends use me as target practice. That's not. Here's what's going to happen. I cut her off, my voice dropping to that calm, cold tone that makes people actually listen. You're going to hang up this phone and never contact me again. My wife made her choice tonight when she chose your approval over her husband's dignity. Now she gets to live with that choice. You can't be serious. She's falling apart here. Then maybe you and your friends can comfort her. You got what you wanted, right? You proved that she values your opinions more than her marriage. Congratulations. I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I blocked my wife's number too. If she wanted to communicate, she could do it through lawyers. But apparently blocking her number just made her more creative. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Different number this time. I answered it, expecting another friend. Please don't hang up. It was Diane, calling from someone else's phone. Her voice was thick with tears, or at least the performance of tears. After 18 years, I'd learned to tell the difference. I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this. We had 18 years to talk about this. Tonight you made it clear there's nothing left to discuss. That's not true. I love you. This is just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I pulled back onto I-95, heading home while she pleaded into my ear. You told me to pay the bill and leave in front of a restaurant full of people after sitting quietly while your friends spent an hour explaining everything that's wrong with me. What part of that did I misunderstand? The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, I was just frustrated. You were being so confrontational with my friends. Confrontational. For defending myself against their attacks. They weren't attacks. They were just being themselves. And you couldn't handle it. There it was. The real truth. Her friends being themselves meant attacking me. And me being myself meant taking it quietly. That was the dynamic she'd expected, the dynamic she'd cultivated for years. And when I refused to play along, I became the problem. You're right, I said, pulling into my driveway in Newton. They were being themselves. And so was I when I walked out. The difference is I'm not asking anyone else to change who they are to make me comfortable. I hung up and walked into the house. Tomorrow I'd start making the calls I needed to make, setting up the protections I needed to set up. Tonight, I just wanted to enjoy the silence. But that silence lasted exactly 10 minutes. My phone rang again. Apparently Diane had moved on to using her other friends' phones. I recognized the number this time. Beverly, the one who'd made the comment about her husband still pursuing her earlier. Something told me this conversation was going to be interesting. What? I answered without any pretense of politeness. Wow, real classy. No wonder she's having second thoughts about this marriage. Second thoughts. I almost laughed. She told me to pay the bill and leave. Those weren't second thoughts. That was a decision. Look, tough guy, your little temper tantrum has gone on long enough. She's here crying her eyes out. And frankly, it's pathetic. Just come back, pay the damn bill, and take your wife home like a man. The sheer audacity of this woman was breathtaking. After spending the evening watching her participate in tearing me down, she was now lecturing me about being a man. Like a man, I repeated. Tell me, what exactly does that mean to you? Does it mean sitting quietly while my wife's friends explain everything that's wrong with me? Does it mean paying for the privilege of being disrespected? Or does it mean knowing when I've had enough and walking away with my dignity intact? It means not abandoning your wife over some harmless girl talk. There was that phrase again. Harmless girl talk. Like there was some magical protection that made verbal abuse acceptable as long as it came from women who called it bonding. Here's what I find fascinating, I said, settling into my favorite chair in my home office. You spent the entire evening trying to tear me down, questioning my masculinity, my worth, everything about me. But now that I've responded exactly like the strong, decisive man you claimed I wasn't, suddenly I'm the problem. That's not what happened. No? Then explain to me what happened. Because from where I was sitting, it looked like three women who decided to use their friend's husband as entertainment, with her full participation and encouragement. We were just having fun. If you can't handle a little teasing. Stop. My voice cut through her excuse like a blade. Stop calling it teasing. You know what teasing is. Teasing is affectionate. Teasing is when people who care about you give you a hard time about something harmless. What you did was systematic, coordinated, and designed to humiliate. You're being way too sensitive about this. Am I? Let me ask you something. How would you feel if your husband invited his buddies over for dinner, and they spent the entire evening explaining everything that was wrong with you? Your looks, your intelligence, your value as a partner, your ability to satisfy a man. And through it all, your husband just sat there laughing along, adding his own comments occasionally. The line went quiet. And then, I continued. When you finally got fed up and said something, your husband told you to pay for everyone's dinner and leave if you couldn't handle the jokes. How would that make you feel? That's different, Beverly said finally. How? How is that different? Because men are supposed to be stronger about these things. Stronger. So it's my job to be strong enough to tolerate any level of disrespect, but it's not your job to be decent enough not to dish it out in the first place. Look, maybe we went a little too far, but that's no reason to blow up your entire marriage. I didn't blow up my marriage, I said. Your friend did when she made it clear that I'm nothing more than a payment method that should shut up or leave. I chose leave. I hung up and blocked that number too. For the next few hours, my phone became a battlefield. Messages from numbers I didn't recognize, each one a different friend or family member that Diane had enlisted in her campaign to get me to come back. Message 59, please just talk to me. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Message 71, they pushed me and I just got caught up. Glenn, please. We can fix this. Message 83, 18 years can't end like this. I read them all, but I didn't respond. Each message just reinforced what I already knew. She was worried about the logistics, the assets, the appearance of it all. Not about me. Not about what she'd done or said. Just about the consequences. At 1 a.m, my phone lit up with a text from someone I did recognize. Diane's sister Patricia, who'd always been reasonable, someone who stayed out of marital disputes and treated both of us fairly. I don't know what happened tonight, but she's at my house crying. Whatever this is about, don't you think you're overreacting? I stared at that message for a long time. If Patricia was reaching out, Diane must be painting quite the picture of wounded innocence. I typed back. Ask her to tell you exactly what she said to me at the restaurant. Word for word. Then ask yourself if you'd accept your husband saying that to you in public. The response came back quickly. She said you were being difficult with her friends, and she got frustrated. That's not what she said. She told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't handle their jokes. In front of a crowded restaurant. After sitting quietly while they spent an hour attacking my character. Long pause. Then, she said that, word for word. In front of witnesses. After 18 years of marriage, she reduced me to a wallet that should shut up or get out. Another long pause. I had no idea. She made it sound like I just exploded over nothing. Yes. That's why I'm done. The line comes naturally to her now. I didn't wait for a response. The conversation was over, just like everything else. By 2 a.m, I'd received messages from 12 different numbers. Friends, family members, even some people I barely knew. Diane was clearly working every angle, trying to find someone who could talk sense into me. But here's what she didn't understand. This wasn't an emotional decision that could be talked away. This was a business decision. She'd breached the fundamental contract of our marriage, mutual respect, and done it publicly, definitively, and without any regard for the consequences. The last message came at 2:47 in the morning from what I assumed was yet another borrowed phone. Please, I know I messed up. Can we just talk about this like adults? I stared at that message for 5 minutes, thinking about 18 years of memories. The good times, the shared dreams, the life we'd built together. Then I thought about her face when her friends were tearing me down. The way she'd lit up with attention, the way she'd participated in my humiliation, the casual cruelty in her voice when she told me to pay and leave. I deleted the message without responding. At 3:30 in the morning, I went to the guest bedroom. Not because I was being dramatic, but because the master bedroom felt like it belonged to people who no longer existed. The couple who'd shared that room was gone, ended the moment she chose her audience over her husband. I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the doubt to creep in. The second guessing, the guilt, the voice that would tell me I'd overreacted. But it never came. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. Because for the first time in our entire marriage, I was exactly where I belonged. In a place where I was respected, valued, and treated with the dignity every person deserves. Even if that place was just a guest room in my own house. I slept better than I had in months. The alarm went off at 7. I woke refreshed, alert, ready. The kind of ready you feel when you know you're about to do something important, something that will define the rest of your life. I made coffee in the kitchen I'd paid for, looking at the appliances I'd bought, the renovations I'd funded. Not with resentment, but with clarity. This was all just stuff. What mattered was what came next. My phone showed no new messages overnight. Diane had finally stopped, either from exhaustion or from the realization that I wasn't coming back. The final count was 87 messages and 14 missed calls, all documented, all saved. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked into Michael Foster's office. He had coffee ready and preliminary paperwork spread across the conference table. For the next hour, we walked through the details. Asset division, the house in Newton, investments, retirement accounts. I was the primary earner, contributing about 75% of the household income over the years. No children. That had been Diane's decision years ago, one I'd gone along with because I thought that's what partners did. This should be relatively clean, Michael said, reviewing the documents. No custody issues, clear financial contributions, and public witnesses to the precipitating incident. We'll file an emergency motion to freeze joint accounts today, then work on the preliminary separation agreement. As I signed the initial documents, my phone buzzed. Another new number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me check. Can't we at least talk? It was Diane, from yet another phone. I typed back, through lawyers. Mine will contact yours. You're really doing this. You already did it. I'm just making it official. By 10 in the morning, I was back in my home office, paperwork filed, accounts protected, future secured. I sat in my chair and looked at the wedding photo still on the shelf. I hadn't removed it yet. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. I thought about who we were 18 years ago. Young, hopeful, building something together. Then I acknowledged who we'd become. Two people living separate lives under one roof. One person providing while the other performed. Somewhere along the way, I'd become the help. The ATM. The convenience. Last night, I'd remembered I was a person first. 18 years of marriage had ended with 6 words. Pay the bill and leave. She'd thought I'd tolerate anything. That my accommodation was infinite. I thought I had to. That being a good husband meant accepting less and less respect. We were both wrong. The man who walked out of that restaurant wasn't coming back. The man who'd accepted diminishing respect was gone forever. What remained was someone who knew his worth and wouldn't accept anything less. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. Dear listeners, that's our ending. If it resonated, subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.